Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Bryant and I'll be your host for this webinar. Please make sure your microphones and web cameras are disabled during the presentation to provide for a smooth recording. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is next week on Wednesday, the 16th at 5:30 p.m. using German periodicals and periodical indexes part 1. So be sure to join us for that one. If you'd like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant, who will be giving a presentation on Mysteries of the Changelog Revealed. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn began doing family history and discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library. She also presents at Riverton, Utah Saturday seminars and other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. In addition, she is a regular contributor to the FamilySearch blog. Kathryn works as a technical writer and instructional designer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and fall weather. And if Kathryn is ready, we'll turn the time over to you.
Yep, I am ready. Bryant, thank you so much. So I'm just sharing my screen here. Okay, and I think we're ready to go. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar on Mysteries of the Changelog Revealed. This is actually an update to a webinar that was done a few years ago because the family tree interface has changed. So we're going to be looking at some of the new things you can do with the changelog in addition to reviewing the standard things that were covered in the previous webinar. So in other words, you don't have to watch the other one. Everything will be here. So let's take a look at what we're going to be covering today in our class. First of all, we'll talk about 3 changelog basics. First of all, what it is, why we need it, and how to read it. And then we're going to talk about 4 things that you can do in the changelog. You can see origin information, in other words, who created a record and when they created it. You can filter entries in the changelog. You can restore information that was changed or deleted erroneously, and you can also fix bad merges. So let's go ahead and dive in. So what is the changelog? From its name, it's pretty much what you would expect. It's a list of changes made to a person's record in family tree, but there's a little bit more to it than that. So for records imported from the previous system, which ironically was called new.familysearch.org and is now no longer exists, for any records that were imported from that system, the changelog starts in 2012 because that's when Family Tree started. The changelog does not include changes that were made in any previous system, new.familysearch.org or any other previous system. For records that were created in Family Tree, the changelog just starts whenever the record was created. So why do we need a changelog? I can guess that I'm hearing some laughter on the part of some of our viewers today because the answer to that question, maybe you've struggled with some changes that shouldn't have been made. And so why do we need a changelog? Well, because Family Tree is an open edit system, which basically means that any user can change any record. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to that. For instance, early church leaders, most of those records records have been locked just because they were getting corrupted so badly. People were, but I think I've mentioned this before, that somebody tried to, actually more than one person, tried to baptize Joseph Smith after he died, as if he forgot to do that during his lifetime. So there were some records in Family Tree that are locked that users can't make changes to, but the large majority of them are open edit. And so anybody can change anything. That means that we might wonder when and why a change was made. We may need to contact the person who made the change, or a change may need to be reversed. So what exactly is tracked in the change log? The changes that are tracked include the following: when the record was created and who created it, vital and other information, so birth dates, death dates, and so forth, relationships, so the changelog shows when a relationship was created, like a parent-child relationship, or if it was disconnected, the changelog will show that as well. The changelog tracks merges, unmerges, and restores. It also tracks sources, memories, and rejected record hints. And then finally, it tracks notes and discussions. What's not tracked? Just a couple of things. Temple ordinances are not tracked in the changelog, so when they're done or reserved or anything, that will not show up. And also when somebody is following or unfollowing a person, that also does not show up in the changelog for privacy reasons. And if following or unfollowing doesn't sound familiar to you, that's the new term for what used to be called the watch list. So it's basically the function that allows you to flag a record so that you're notified when changes are made. But these changes you'll never be notified of these items here. You'll never be notified about temple ordinances being done or about somebody following or unfollowing the record that you've decided to follow. So how do you access the changelog? It's very simple. You open up anybody's family tree page, and then over on the right-hand side, in that panel on the right, there's a box called Latest Changes. It's going to show you the 3 most recent changes, but if you want to see all of the changes made since the record entered the system, then you click Show All at the bottom of that box. And when you do that, you're going to see something similar to this. Now, sometimes people look at this, especially if it's their first time seeing it, and they go, I have no idea what I'm looking at here. So we're going to walk through the layout of the changelog to try and make sense of the way that the information is organized on the screen. The first thing to be aware of is that the newest changes are listed first. So in other words, the changes are listed in reverse chronological order. So if you want to see the oldest changes, then of course you need to scroll down to the bottom. The changelog now consists of 4 columns. Let's walk through each one of those quickly. The first one is the change column, and it shows the type of change. So you can see here, a type of change can be when a relationship is added, when vital information is changed, when a source is attached, and so forth. The next column, the value column, gives you details of the change. So it will give you additional relationships, dates, places, source names, that kind of thing. The following column is actually the date and user column, because it will tell you not only the date that a change was made, but also who made it. And then finally, the last column doesn't have a header, but for lack of a better term, I'm going to call this the status column. Let's look at the kinds of things that you would see in the status column. If you see the word current, that means that the information you're looking at right here is what is actually currently on the Details tab of the person page. If you see an option to restore, that means that this information used to be on the person page, but it has since been replaced with different information. And if you decide that the change was not appropriate, then you can click Restore and bring this information back. And we'll actually be looking at that in more detail a little bit later on. And then finally, if you see the word Reference, you can click that to see additional information. I wanted to point out a very important caution when you're interpreting changelog entries, and that is that when you change a name, a birth date, or a death date, that change populates backward in the changelog so that it appears on most of the entries made even before the change. And that is so important to be aware of if you're trying to troubleshoot like a bad merge or something, that information that you see most of the time will reflect the current information, not what the information was on the date of the change. Now, there's one exception to that, and that is text-only items. So those items are not affected, and usually the text-only items are the original import or creation data. So if those just sounded like words kind of ringing around, let's look at an actual example so you see how this works in the changelog. If you're like me, it's a lot easier to understand something if somebody shows me an example. So we're looking here at the changelog of John James Wellington Hibbert. And you notice he's got a number of entries that show his name and show his birth date and his death date. And then there's this original creation data at the bottom of the changelog. Well, this data down here, these are the only text-only entries. So in other words, these are static text, and they are never going to change no matter what other changes are made to this person. But these other entries, these four that are outlined up here, these entries are reflecting the information that is currently on the Details tab and not the information that was necessarily on this entry at the time it was made. So let's look at how that happens. So I went into beta, just so you know I didn't mess up the real information in the live system of Family Tree. But for those of you who may wonder about beta, if you go to beta.familysearch.org, it's a sandbox. And so you sign in just as you would to normal Family Search, but in beta, you can play around with things, delete things, merge things, try things out without affecting any information in the real system. So I went into beta and I thought, just for the heck of it, or just actually to illustrate this, I'm going to change that Wellington to Washington. So now he's become John James Washington Hibbert, which totally isn't his name, but just for purposes of illustration. And then I changed his birth year to be 1891, whereas it used to be 1885. So let's look at how these changes affect the changelog. The first thing that is good to note is that the changes are noted in static text. So I made these changes, and these aren't going to change. Everybody's going to always be able to see the change that I made on this date. However, if you look at the other entries before, do you remember that those entries used to say John James Wellington Hibbert, the ones that were made in 2006? Now, because I changed it to Washington, these all say Washington, even though these entries were made in 2016. The text-only entries, though, at the bottom, those still stayed the same. So it's really important to be aware of this. You can't take for granted that the name you're looking at and the dates you're looking at were the actual information at the time of the change. And so what if you wondered about a name change? How could you see that? Well, you would actually filter your changelog to show just name changes. And I've showed you here how to do it just quickly, but we're actually going to walk through in a lot more detail how to use filter. But in this case, you notice that when I filtered it to only show changes to do with the name, then I see the original name of John James Wellington Hibbert, and then I see the name that I changed, John James Washington Hibbert, on August 23rd, 2020. Okay, so that's the introduction to the changelog, kind of how to read it. Now let's talk about the things that you can do in the changelog. And honestly, I think the changelog might be one of the most underutilized tools in Family Tree. It's actually quite powerful. It's got some great features. So beyond simply just seeing the list of changes, here are the things that you can do. You can see the origin information, and we talked about this in the beginning, but it's been a few slides since then, so we'll just review it. You can see origin information. You can filter your changelog entries. You can restore information if it's been replaced by bad information or deleted. And then finally, whoops, did that too fast. Finally, you can fix bad merges. So let's walk through each one of those. The original contributor of a record in Family Tree is always going to be listed at the bottom of the changelog. It's not always necessarily the last entry, but it'll be among the last entries. And so you might have to, you want to look for person added, and it'll probably be just within the first few entries at the very bottom of the changelog. Now you'll notice, this is something important to point out, you'll notice once in a while when you go into the changelog and try to determine the origin of the record, that you'll see changelog entries that are date stamped with 2012, and they have the name FamilySearch. Now, a logical conclusion might be, oh, FamilySearch must have researched and added that name. While that's logical, it's actually not accurate. So what this indicates, anytime that you see a changelog entry that is created by FamilySearch in 2012, that just means that it came over from the old system, which was new.familysearch.org. So it doesn't mean that FamilySearch checked it out. It doesn't mean that this has been validated. As it was explained to me, actually, they had the name of the contributor in the old system, but they didn't have permission to share everybody's information. So FamilySearch made the proper decision to protect those people's privacy, and for all the records that were imported from the old system, they're just stamped FamilySearch and some date in 2012. Now, a cool thing is, if you see a contributor's name other than FamilySearch, you can actually send a message to that person. So when I clicked on this name, I got this little pop-up. Because I've chosen to share my email shows up on this little pop-up. But if I had not chosen to share my email, as some users do not choose to, then you can still send them a message. FamilySearch has everybody's email, but they only share it online if the person has given permission. So what happens behind the scenes is you fill out this little form, and then you click to send it, and FamilySearch forwards it to the email of that person. So it protects their privacy, but it still allows you to communicate with them. Okay, let's move on to the next one, the second item, which is filtering the changelog. So as you've probably noticed, if you've looked at some changelog entries, they can get really long. Honestly, this one right here is about a quarter of the changelog for this Frances Grant Bescabee, so this isn't even showing all of it. And you can imagine, if you were trying to look for information through this, it's like reading a book. You could be searching forever. Well, fortunately, FamilySearch has created a filtering function that allows you to make it easy to hone in on just the information that you want to see. So as you might imagine, the way that you bring up that feature is to click Filter. And when you do, this panel opens off to the right-hand side, and it's got a bunch of options that you can pick. It basically represents pretty much anything that you could put on a person page. So the default, as you notice up here, is all changes, which means that it's showing everything. In other words, the changelog has not been filtered. If you want to filter by a certain item, it's as simple as just clicking on that item. The trick here is that you can only select one filter at a time. And I hope in the future that changes. I don't know if anyone from FamilySearch is watching this. It would be so cool to be able, for instance, to filter by both death and burial or by both birth and death. But as of right now, as of the date of this recording, you can only select one filter at a time. So if I click name, I get all the name entries. If I click bar mitzvah, I get all the bar mitzvah entries. And the minute I click one thing, it undoes whatever was clicked before. So just one at a time. And it's still very useful. Even though you can't do multiple filters, it's very helpful. So filtering results, just to give you a visual on this, it takes a big, long, unwieldy changelog and it reduces it to something like this, which is very readable, very manageable. Makes it a lot easier to find the information that you're looking for. If you want to remove the filter, this part to me was a little bit counterintuitive. The way you remove a filter is by clicking All Changes. I expected that if I clicked the X or clicked the filter button, that it would remove the filter, but it actually doesn't. So if you click the filter button or you click the X, what it's going to do is close this panel, but it's not going to remove the filter. So the reason you might want to do that is if you wanted more room on the screen. So it would hide this panel, but it would still keep whatever filter you had selected until you go back in and you click All Changes to set it back to showing everything. And I forgot I had that there. So just closing the filter doesn't clear the filter. Click All Changes first. So that's a good review, right? Okay, now let's talk about restoring changed information. When changed information can be restored, a restore link appears next to it as shown here. And so when you click that link, you're going to get a pop-up and it's going to show you what is currently on the page on the Details tab and what will be restored if you click that restore link. Now, in this case, this is just an example. This old information, actually, I would not want to restore that. But suppose that I did, I would just click the restore button, and then that information would be put back on the person page. So now we're ready to talk about the last item of what you can do in the changelog, and that is fix a bad merge. And the changelog offers you two different options for doing that. The first option is if no changes have been made since the merge, then there's going to be an unmerge button that you can click. However, if changes have been made since the merge, you're not going to see the unmerge button, but it is still possible to restore that person who was deleted in the merge or archived in the merge. So let's go ahead and walk through both of those scenarios. So you see here, because the merge can be undone, the unmerge button appears here next to the person. And it's just as simple as clicking that button. And when you do, you get this pop-up window. And it's going to ask you the reason that the unmerge is correct. In other words, somebody else merged this, so why do you think you should unmerge it? And it's good that they're asking for that information. So you fill out that information, whoops, and then you click the unmerge button and it just unmerges the person. What happens when you click that unmerge button is that both records are restored to their pre-merge state. In other words, it's really as though the merge had never happened. Everything goes back exactly as it was. However, we said before that merges can only be undone if no changes have been made since the merge. And you might be wondering, well, why is that? Why can't the unmerge button always be available? Well, the reason for that is that if changes have been made since the merge, Family Tree can't tell what to do with those changes. They can't tell if the changes should go on both records or neither or just one of them. There's no way systematically to tell how to divide up those changes when you do the unmerge. And so for that reason, you won't see an unmerge button next to a merge after anything's been changed. Or I didn't say that very well. You won't see an unmerge button if any changes have been made since the merge. So you look down here and you notice there's our merge, and changes have been made since the merge. And so when you look next to the merge, there's not an unmerge button. So to restore the person who was deleted in the merge, here's just a quick step-by-step. You're going to want to click the name of the deleted person, and you're going to get their summary card, and so then you click their name again. And then you're going to get taken to their person page, except it's going to show that they have been deleted. Well, there's going to be this little link, and this is surprisingly hard to see for some reason. I've noticed that when people get into this page at first, they go, wait, I don't see the link you're talking about. So it's in this little text over on the right-hand side of the screen, just above latest changes. And when you click that, you're going to again get a pop-up box that is going to ask you to explain why you're restoring this person. And it's really important, I think, to give a good explanation there, because otherwise chances are good that somebody will come along and say, hey, I merged these people. Why did somebody unmerge them? I'm just going to merge them again. And because they may have felt that the merge, presumably they did feel that the merge was correct. So it's just a good idea. You don't have to write a long reason statement, but just enough to indicate how you know that these two people are not the same and need to be unmerged. And then when you've written a good reason statement, you click Restore. And this is what happens. This is a little bit more tricky than just unmerging. You remember we talked about how Family Tree doesn't know what to do with any changes that have been made since the merge. Well, the original record that you just undeleted is restored to its pre-merge state because Family Tree has a record of that. They know exactly what that record looked like before the merge, so it's an easy enough thing to put that record back the way it was. So then what do they do with the changes? Well, they don't want to delete them because presumably those are good changes. They apply to somebody and you don't want to lose them. So the changes stay on what was the surviving record. So the surviving record is actually not altered at all except for temple ordinances, which are restored. Both records will have the temple ordinances exactly like they were before the merge. If you ever have reason to believe that hasn't happened, you would want to open a support case because the temple ordinances are actually kept in a separate database. They're not kept in the same database as Family Tree, so they're protected, which is a good thing. So they will not be messed up by bad merges in Family Tree. So this part right here is actually why cleanup is usually necessary after undeleting somebody from a merge, because any mistakes that were made would still be there. Any incorrectly attached sources would still be there. Any sources that really applied to this other person would still be attached to this person. So for this webinar today, we're not going to go through the process of cleaning up. But if you're interested in knowing more about that, this webinar right here called Fixing Incorrect Merges in Family Tree, it's available on our BYU Family History Library webinar index, and it goes into detail both about how to analyze and tell whether a merge is incorrect, and then also how to clean up after you've had to restore a person. And then this other one, also Case Study of Elizabeth Hepton, this walks through some additional examples very similar to the examples that are shown in this webinar. So I want to conclude by showing you a bonus tip that I'm not sure is really documented any place. I kind of either stumbled on it or somebody showed it to me, but it's kind of a cool little feature. So when you are editing information on the person page, so for example, if I wanted to edit this birth information, I would click Edit. And then when you get inside, there's this little link that we tend not to notice that says See All Changes. Well, it doesn't really mean see all changes. It means see all changes related to birth. So if you click this, you get taken into the changelog pre-filtered by whatever you selected. So in this case, it was birth. So now I see the changelog filtered to only birth entries. So that's a quick way of getting into the changelog if you're ever editing a birth or a death or something and you just want to quickly see information in the changelog that pertains to that. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Thank you so much for being with us. In this webinar, we talked about changelog basics, what the changelog is, why we need it, and how to read it. And then we walked through how to see the original creation information of a record, how to filter to see changes that you're interested in, how to restore information, and how to fix bad merges. So thank you for your time and interest today. And let's see what questions we have. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the chat. Aha, Julie, good question. What do we mean by text-only data? And to be honest with you, I struggled to find a good way to describe that. What I mean is that this is just plain text on the screen, and it's never going to change regardless of changes made to the person page. And that's in opposition to those entries that we looked at that actually do change depending on changes that you made to the details page. Thank you for asking that great question. Colby, thank you so much for putting the beta URL in there. I appreciate that. Terrell says changelog needs a merges filter button. Terrell, it actually has one now. Do you know what? I think when it first came out, it didn't, but let me just go back to the slide. I was delighted to see it. I hope the screenshot shows it, but let me just pop back here to the one where I showed the Oh, it doesn't show it, shoot. But if you scroll down past all this information, it's towards the lower part of the filter panel. So fortunately, they have put that in there. Okay, let's see. That was Terrell's very good suggestion. Daryl says, what happens if two people are filtering the same name simultaneously? Do you know what, Daryl? I'm actually not sure about that, but I'll give you my best guess based on my experience as a web developer. Once you look at that page, that information is just being displayed in your browser, and it's not updating until you refresh the page. And so my guess is that when you're filtering, it's just going to filter information shown in your local browser, and it's not going to show what somebody else is filtering, even if they're doing it at the same time, because they'll see what they've loaded into their local browser. If anybody knows different than that, please post it in the chat, but that's my best guess, is that you won't run into any problems or conflicts, even if two people are filtering simultaneously. Christine, excellent question. What is the surviving person? When a merge is being done, you get to designate one person as, quote, the surviving person, and one person as the person to be deleted or archived. So the survivor is just the person that you picked in the merge that is still going to show up in Family Tree. So when you undo a merge, they're technically not a survivor anymore. They're just another person, if that makes sense. But I guess they used to be the survivor, right? And then once you restore the person that used to be merged, then I don't know, that just seemed like the easiest way to me to designate them even after the merge is undone. And I hope that makes sense, but if it doesn't, please post a follow-up question in the chat, Christine. So let's see, Bree said link to slides. Yes, Bree, let me grab that for you really quickly. That's a great question. Oh, I didn't go to the final slide. If you want to go, I've actually put a page that has all the slide presentations that I give here, and you're welcome to copy those, use them for training or whatever. So if you go to tinyurl.com/fh-resources, you'll get the whole list of presentations, but I can also escape out of this and get you this link. And I'll just throw that in the chat so you'll have the direct link to this presentation. So I'm going to go back to the chat. Oh, Linda, thank you so much for posting that URL. And I have just put in the direct link to my mind just went blank because I was reading another chat message that just shows you that I can't multitask. So I just put in the link that goes directly to the slide deck that we use today. Oh, Daryl points out a very good point. You can't manually delete a person any longer, but when you merge somebody, they call the person that you've merged a deleted person. So they will never show up in the search results. You can't like see them in the tree, but if you have their PID, their ID number, you know, the 7-digit number, you can actually search for them using the find function and bring them up by ID, or you can go into the changelog and click the name of the deleted person and it will bring up that person for you. Let's just go back. Cami said, can I see an example of text only? And that actually will allow me to show the other item about the deleted person. So let me go back into the presentation and we're going to scroll to the picture that shows. Okay, so Cami, to answer your question, this is an example right here of text-only entries. So they're just in plain text. They're not going to change. Whereas these right here, this one, this one, this one, and this one are actually all linked to the current information on the person page. So whenever you make a change on the person page, these top 4 and any others that look like them, in other words, that have this little icon off to the side, they are going to change to reflect the information currently on the person page, regardless of this date over here, the date of when the change was made. But these text-only entries are not going to change. Honestly, Cami, the easiest way to tell whether they're text-only or not is hover over them. If they're text-only, nothing is going to happen. But if they're linked and they're showing current information, when you hover over, you're going to see an underline. And also when you click them, you're going to get the summary card. So I hope that helps, but please ask a follow-up question if it didn't answer your question. Okay, so I'm looking at the rest of the questions in the chat. Link to the slides. Example of text only. I think that brings us to the end of our questions. And so unless there are any other questions, I will turn the time back over to Bryant.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kathryn.
You bet.
Awesome. And let me just share my screen again. Just a reminder about our webinar coming up next week on the 16th at the same time, Wednesday, 5:30 p.m., using German periodicals and periodical indexes, part 1 with Larry Jensen. And this is part 1 of a 4-part series. The other 3 parts will be held on the upcoming the Saturdays following the 16th. So Saturdays at 3 p.m. Hope you join us for that. And we hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.